Hello, and welcome to this evening's edition of the 2023 Von Karman series. My name is Nikki Wyrick from JPL's Office of Communications and Education, and thank you so much for joining us tonight for our discussion, More Than Rocket Science, JPL's COVID-19 Ventilator Vital. In response to the coronavirus pandemic, JPL spacecraft engineers worked with medical professionals to develop ventilator intervention technology accessible locally, or VITAL, a breathing aid that helps critically ill COVID-19 patients and bolstered scarce stocks of traditional hospital ventilators. Joining us as co host this evening is Kat Park. Her background in design has taken her from Disney Imagineering, drafting concept art for the Disney parks, to her current work as a senior strategist in JPL's Office of Formulation and Strategy, working to identify, create, and orient multidisciplinary teams to develop and mature innovative concepts. Hiya, Kat.
Hi.
We are so happy to have you with us tonight. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Remember, this is your space program. We want you to be involved with this conversation. So if you're watching on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook Live, or LinkedIn, ask questions in the chat box, and our social media team will bring in as many as we can during our talk tonight. If you don't see the chat box, reload your page, and it should be right there.
Awesome. Thank you, Kat. And just a heads up for all of you viewers tonight, Kat was also involved in Vital. And Kat, you worked closely with Dr. Stacey Boland, our speaker for tonight, to develop user guides for the novel machine as it was being built for medical use and FDA approval. So we are very happy to have you with us. Now, just a reminder to our viewers, as always, if we run into any technical difficulties or small failures, we ask for your patience and please do stick with us. We will get them sorted out as soon as we possibly can. And now let's introduce our speaker for this evening, Dr. Stacey Boland. She is a principal systems engineer at JPL and is the project systems engineer for the multi-angle imager for aerosols Earth Venture Instrument, or MAIA. She is also the operations lead for the VITAL project. Now, Stacey was awarded NASA's Exceptional Achievement Medal in 2009 and 2015. She also was awarded a NASA Outstanding Public Leadership Medal in 2019 and was integral, or you could say vital, to the VITAL project. Hiya, Stacey. How you doing tonight?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thanks.
Oh, we are so glad to have both of you with us. So, Stacey, tell us, how did you end up working on VITAL?
Oh my goodness. Going back to the beginning of the pandemic where we had just all got sent home. And if you remember that time, things were pretty awful, really. I mean, we were all trying to figure a lot of things out. We were trying to figure out how to get groceries. We were trying to figure out how to help kids connect to get to their Zooms to get to school, trying to figure out how to do work from home. But at the same time, really trying to figure out how to deal with being in a pandemic and hearing about shortages of things, wanting to help, and hearing over and over again that the best thing we could do to help is to stay home. And I totally get it. Staying home was absolutely important. We had to flatten the curve, right? Slow things down so that people slow the spread so that we could figure out how to actually deal with this thing. But it was really, as an engineer, things are broken. You want to fix them. What can we do? Is there something that I can do more than just staying home? I'm going to stay home, but what else can I do? And just so happens, actually, that one of the last days that we were on lab, some JPLers, a JPLer, Dave Van Buren, actually talked to our lab's chief engineer while he was getting coffee in the cafeteria and said, we've got to be able to do something. What can JPL do? And that kicked off some brainstorming that led to an email that I got saying, are you interested in trying to help out, do something with the pandemic? We're not quite sure exactly what we're going to do. We're not sure how we're going to do it. Probably isn't going to work. It's going to be really hard, really intense. But do you want to join us? And yeah, of course, put me in. I mean, if there's something I can do to help, just say it. Let me know what I can do. And so turns out that thing turned out to be VITAL.
So, Stacey, it sounds like an interesting process to build up to, but what is VITAL?
So VITAL is a ventilator that we designed at JPL to try to help with the shortage of traditional ventilators in hospitals. So hospitals use ventilators to do a whole lot of different things for patients. They tend to have a lot of different features. They're complicated machines, and they don't have very many of them because they don't usually need very many of them. But when the pandemic came, people were actually needing to be on ventilators. They needed more than they had, and there was a prediction that there was going to be a shortage. Vital was our response to say, if people on the front line say they need something, let's find a way to help them get what they need. Our goal was to make sure that the ventilator shortage was not going to be the problem. We wanted to make sure ventilators would be available whenever and wherever they were needed. And so we developed this ventilator technology. And you can actually see one of our early prototypes actually sitting right here behind me. So that's Vital.
That's great. Obviously, this was something you wanted to get done quickly. So how did the development process go for developing Vital?
This was an incredibly intense effort. We knew time was important. We needed to get to a good solution fast. A better solution too late wasn't going to be helpful. And so this is something that we had to figure out how to deal with when only a few people were even allowed to come on lab. And so we had the majority of the team actually working remote. If you could pull up picture 24. Actually, I really need to show this was a team effort here at JPL. And most of us actually only saw each other in the WebEx virtual work type of style. You can see some of the on-lab folks down in the middle and the rest of us there as individual pictures. But this is the Vital team. And we had to just find a way to make it happen. We used just about every type of technology to communicate that you can think of. We had meetings in the morning, in the afternoon, evening. We worked around the clock, working concurrently. Trying to do this and do it fast and do something that was so out of our element. We usually are dealing with spacecraft and instruments and science and engineering, not so much medical devices. And so we had a lot to learn to come up to speed. And so our approach was basically to start with all of it at the same time. Instead of following what you would normally have kind of a linear process, you start at the beginning and then you work your way through it. At the very beginning, we said, what is it going to need to do? What are the problems we're trying to solve? And we broke it up into pieces and gave different people responsibilities for those different parts. We had people like Mike Johnson, Michelle Easter helping us in the lab designing and building and testing prototypes. We had Chris Yonker helping us actually work with the FDA on how we were going to actually get an emergency use authorization during the pandemic so these could actually make their way to the patients that needed them. We had Arby Karapetian helping us figure out how can you actually find parts to do anything these days. And so our team set out not just to build a ventilator, but to build a ventilator that could actually produce in the middle of a pandemic in mass quantities if needed, whenever, wherever, anywhere around the world. Oh yeah, and make it easy to operate. This was not the time to take weeks of training to learn how to use something new. This was something that had to be almost intuitive. And traditional ventilators are things that really specialists only use at hospitals. But in a pandemic situation, we knew that people were being pressed into service on the front lines. We were seeing this in the news every day. And so we had the opportunity to try to solve a different sort of problem. We weren't really trying to replace traditional ventilators, but we were trying to produce something that could serve the majority of the needs for those COVID patients so that those who really needed all of the features of a traditional ventilator could access those.
That is incredible. Now, I want to talk about, you're talking about all these moving parts and pieces. You brought up several of your team members, but you had to bring this whole group together pretty fast to get this done, right?
Yeah, we definitely did. And you talk about get out of your comfort zone. Everybody was reaching out to their full networks. I was calling my sister, who's a hospitalist in Mississippi, asking her, what did nurses do with a ventilator? And the answer was, well, nurses don't get to touch the ventilator. So what do we do? And, everybody was calling in people. We had great relationships with, we had two doctors in particular. If we could pull up picture number 11, I wanted to highlight Dr. Gurovich from Huntington Hospital and Dr. Levin from Mount Sinai. So Dr. Gurovich is in the middle and Dr. Levin is on the screen on the left. This shows a few things. One, our doctors were involved constantly from the beginning of this with us, helping us understand what a ventilator was, what it needed to do, how to make it intuitive. It also shows that we were actually working generally remotely. You see Dr. Levin there, and I'm actually on the other screen, kind of in the middle, towards the right, next to Mike Johnson. We would go to the lab as robot avatars and drive around to be able to interact with the team and see what's going on without actually being there in person. And so really everybody, it was an all hands on deck sort of effort where everybody pitched in every which way they could. And these doctors really stepped up to help us out. Dr. Gurovich was there on day one, literally helping us understand what a ventilator does. Dr. Levin, it turns out, was actually, we tested our first prototype in his lab. And that was a whole 38 days after we started this development effort. And if you want to show slide 19, you can see the vital just passing its tests on day 38. And so that's Dr. Levin and his team at Mount Sinai. And they were absolutely instrumental in helping us understand the problem that actually needed to be solved in the middle of the pandemic, that the ventilator didn't need to do everything, but it needed to do what COVID patients needed at the time. And it turned out to be just a fantastic solution to a problem that we didn't really know existed, that there really isn't this simple sort of ventilator out there. There's either a full-featured ventilator or there really wasn't something there. And when you're in a pandemic situation and need something in mass quantities, this was a gap that needed to be filled, and we were proud to help fill that gap.
It's incredible to think how quickly you did all this. And I have a lot more questions for you. But Stacey, we have had some questions pop up from the viewers, and I want to bring them in. So Kat, what are they asking out there? We've got time for maybe 2 questions before we move on.
Yeah, of course. So Travis on Twitter is asking, is 37 days a short time to develop something?
Oh my goodness, it's incredibly short, especially for a space mission, it takes years. For medical devices, it also takes years. In fact, quite a few years. There's the design and the development, there's the test, and then there's going through the actual regulatory process for these. I mean, this is a real medical device. It's used for intubated, sedated patients in a hospital environment. Your key care about is making sure it's reliable, it actually helps, and it doesn't harm. And there are just so many things that have to happen for all of those needs to actually be met. And so this was an incredibly intense effort. And even though it's 38 days, they were very long days. It was a very big team. It was a very expert team. And we had a lot of help. We had help from doctors. We had help from the FDA. Some of the medical device manufacturers actually also helped. And to give you an idea of how things evolved, if you want to show slide 5, can show you one of our earliest kind of prototype efforts. You can see here's Benjo and Rain with one of our early prototypes. And then if you want to go to slide 9, you can see not long after how much more complicated things would get as we were getting things pulled together. And so we went from breadboards and prototypes to kind of the splayed out larger system with test equipment setups. There's a lot of complexity required to make something simple. And what was great is we had people who are used to following and tracking all of those details, understanding and using judgment about what mattered and what didn't. But at the end of the day, this is a medical device. And to actually have this be useful, we applied and received an emergency use authorization from the FDA. And that's no small feat. We actually, I think our application, it was quite a bit over 500 pages for that submission. And that's something that the whole team was working on in parallel. And I can't say enough for how this team came up to speed with so many different tools, and how the collaborative tools that were available to us that let us all really work in parallel on something that's usually done in series. To give you another idea of how things went and how intense this time period was, I needed to write the operating manual. That's one of the things that would be needed for submitting for regulatory approval. And I was talking with Brandon Metz, who was working on the electronics and software. We were having this conversation. I was like, okay, I'm writing the manual. So how does it work? And there was this moment where we both realized we were waiting for the other one to tell us how it worked, because we had to make up how it needed to work so that we could make it work that way. And so instead of starting from the beginning with a bunch of requirements like we're used to with a space mission and spending a lot of time going through reviews and making things perfect and iterating on a design, I was writing the manual while we were thinking of how it was going to work, while we were building it, while someone else was preparing the test plan for it, and someone else was working on the regulatory aspects of it. So, and safety aspects of it, and making sure that all of these pieces all connected. So it took a tremendous amount of coordination. We had people like Leon Alkali, Carrie Weisberg helping us start and end each meetings, reminding ourselves what we're doing to stay focused. We didn't have time to really dwell on things. If we didn't know how something worked, it was, okay, let's find somebody else to have them dig into it or help each other. We each had areas that we kind of led, but we also all contributed to each other's areas. I mean, this is absolutely, truly a team effort, and really quite an amazing team to have worked with. It was just an amazing experience to be part of this team.
Oh man, Stacey, I'm getting really emotional from that answer. I definitely remember how generous everyone was with their time. Like if you ever had to make something, you could literally just call them up or send an email and they would be right there with you. So that's incredible. So Srihari on LinkedIn is asking, what was the most challenging component of this project?
I think the most challenging part to me was the fact that we were doing this in the pandemic. We had all of the urgency of wanting to help because we saw such an important need, but we were in the pandemic too. This wasn't just to help other people in an abstract, far away sense. This was at the same time where, I mean, let's be honest, many of us were like washing our groceries if we could get groceries. I mean, this was, nobody really knew how things were going to play out or what mattered and what didn't matter. And it was trying to not just be the engineer, but I was also, a daughter, a mother, a wife, and a person living in a pandemic, and trying to find a way to still support those people in my family and stay safe myself and wish the best for my team, but also make a whole lot of progress really fast on something that was important to try to pitch in. So it was the most challenging, but it's also part of what I think made this happen was we were all so aligned and so motivated. We all were heading in the same direction, trying to do the same thing, completely focused on this problem. And quite frankly, it was really a blessing and a privilege to get to work on something like this at a difficult time. Being able to really focus and doing something productive was really a gift.
I mean, it's incredible. I keep saying that word, but I feel like there is no words to explain what the team did for both of you and for all of the community. So, Stacey, you've talked about a couple ways about how Vital is different from other things, but how is it significantly different, and what need did it solve that wasn't already being solved? And for my audience members that are asking questions, we will come back for more questions, I promise. So just hold on to that for me.
So Vital is different because it actually is tailored specifically to the features that were needed by COVID patients. And those were very basic features. And so we, instead of trying to add more features or anything else, we were solely focused on making this easy to manufacture, easy to operate, use as few parts as possible, and use parts that could actually be found in the middle of a pandemic where the supply chain was, let's just call it, challenging. I think we all have stories of the things we couldn't find during the pandemic, finding the parts you need to make a ventilator. But by the way, we also put our own requirement on ourselves to not interfere with manufacturing full-featured ventilators. We didn't want to disrupt the supply chain for traditional ventilators because those manufacturers were making them as fast as they could too. This was something we wanted to add to the table, and we didn't want to take anything away from any other solutions that were out there. So this was really our main goal, was to make sure that a ventilator shortage was not what you were going to hear about during the pandemic, so that ventilators were something that if they were needed, they could exist. And so we spent actually, and Kat knows this better than many people, how much time we spent making sure not just that it worked, not just that it could get approved, but that it could be built and operated very easily. This team put together documentation. If we want to pull up slide 22, worked on the user interface to make sure that the front panel was intuitive to people who worked in a hospital. We worked on reference cards that could be laminated and stuck right next to the ventilator, telling them how to operate it. We shot videos showing how to operate the ventilator and address different alarms. And you can see me as a robot there again. I was driving around trying to direct some of our training video, which Michelle Easter did just a phenomenal job actually demonstrating all of those key functions of the ventilator. We also have websites with videos and animations and 3D renderings to try to show step-by-step how to manufacture these. So for licensees, which we haven't gotten to talk about yet, but our licensees, we gave them a whole package of information to be ready to build, operate, to provide training, a real end-to-end solution here. And so in terms of licensees, we're JPL, we're NASA, we're not a medical device company. And what we wanted to do was contribute the technology, contribute the ability to serve this need. And so Caltech actually offered a cost-free license for the duration of the pandemic for companies that are interested in building Vital. And we have actually quite a few licensees that are really making this happen. And if you want to show, this is one of the amazing things about getting to do this, is it gave me an excuse to actually get in touch with some of our licensees to see how things are going. And I asked if they could send some pictures. So if we could show the pictures from the licensees, this is just something that when we were designing and developing this is what we had in mind. This was these ventilators being available through our licensees wherever they're needed. And the licensees have scaled up. They've gotten these into hospitals, and some have made modifications. They've incorporated it into their own product line, and some are building it exactly as we designed it. And seeing that operating manual that Kat and I worked on translated into other languages, seeing the front panel translated has just been it's just been really something else. And I really shout out to our licensees. They've been amazing. I think they shared the vision to make sure there's not a shortage, and they're still out there making sure that's the case.
I'm glad to hear that they're still out there making sure that's the case. And again, the ability to really spread this, it's great what your project did. So when you look back at all this now and you reflect on what happened and what's going on, what kind of stands out to you as your most important or most interesting reflection on this process?
Really, this was just the incredible team dynamic that we were able to have in such a difficult time, to be able to work with this team with many people that I hadn't met. In fact, I didn't meet many of them until about 2 years after we did this project. It's just unbelievable when people that want to help can come together, actually come up with something that they can do, and stay completely focused on solving that problem. When I was in school and learning all sorts of different things in school, what I wanted to do was be able to do something useful and, to be ready for whatever challenges that I couldn't even imagine yet. And this was definitely one of those. You want to be the person in the room when there's a difficult challenge. And this was really one of those. And seeing how engineers and scientists, yes, medical professionals, but also designers, writers, people with the hands-on technicians that we had. I mean, the number of people and the number of disciplines that came together. We had people helping us pull together all of this documentation for the regulatory approvals. Talk about getting out of your comfort zone. I mean, every one of us was on a learning curve like we'd never been on. And when you're able to just say, you know what, this is a problem that needs to be solved. What does it take to do it? I'm all in. This team just did amazing things.
They did, and they've left a legacy. For our audience members, please make sure you're putting those questions in the chat. We're going to come to audience questions in just one more moment. But Stacey, I've got one final question for just you. We're looking at the current world now. What's going on with Vital?
Well, what's going on with Vital is our licensees have taken it and are off and running. Like I said, some of them are building it just like we designed it. Some have added features or incorporated it into other products. But Vital is out there in the world. And so I'm glad that at this point, we're not in the midst of the worst of the pandemic. I'm glad that we're not seeing a huge ventilator shortage, but this is something that is out there now. It can be produced whenever and wherever it's needed. And that information is in the hands of our licensees.
That is fantastic to hear, and I'm glad they've hit the ground running with that and keep on running. So let's open it up for some more viewer questions. Kat, what are they asking out there?
Hi, this is a really interesting one. So are JPL ventilators still being used, and how did you maintain sterility?
JPL ventilators are still being used, but I would say licensee built ventilators using JPL's designs are being used. JPL only ever built prototypes. So if you want to show slide number 4, that's the whole set that we built. We actually had 2 different types of ventilators, one that was suited for hospitals and another one for field hospitals. And so some licensees build one kind, some the other, some both. But our licensees have these out in the field now. In terms of sterility, the actual device and the manufacture of the device, again, is part of the manufacturing processes of those licensees. It was a challenge, though, to make sure that all of the parts could handle the sterilization processes that are needed, and also working in an oxygen-rich environment, which is not something that we always have to deal with space. We have some experience with that, but in high oxygen environments, that's another whole set of challenges that needed to be dealt with. But our team was up for that as well. So the actual patient circuit, which is the tubing that goes through, is something that's a single use and was something that was already available for procurement. It's not part of something that we had to develop for Vital. And so the sterility for those is ensured through their own manufacturing processes.
Awesome, that's really interesting. Thank you. Vaeda on YouTube is asking, how did you source the parts without interrupting existing supply?
So we had the fantastic Arby Karapetian that actually was in charge of our supply chain, and it involved, we had parts lists, and he and his team would go through and look at what parts, what alternate parts existed. We would check with manufacturers about the availability of the parts. We used different types of parts than would typically be used in a medical device, things that are high reliability and compatible with all of the safety and environmental requirements. But remember, we're not medical device manufacturers, so we started with where do we get parts? And we started from those, and there wasn't a lot in common. And we tried to make sure that there wasn't. In fact, one of the things before, we didn't, by the way, just jump in and decide to develop ventilators. We actually thought about what is needed right now. And there were actually quite a few different efforts that happened at JPL. The ventilator is only one of those efforts. But we first asked whether there was something we could do to actually help manufacturers manufacture their ventilators faster. Were there parts that they had a hard time getting, that kind of thing. And so we worked directly with manufacturers to make sure that we weren't getting in the way, that we were additive, trying to add solutions instead of causing problems. So really, that's kind of the long answer, but the short answer is it was tough, but it was a priority for us. And so we had someone in charge of that who took that job very seriously, and he and his team did a fantastic job helping us source parts in a very, very difficult supply chain environment.
Thank you so much. There are so many great questions about Vital, the design of Vital, the sort of technical stuff about Vital. I think this one is a pretty good one. The Ad Astra Vita project on YouTube asks, wondering if Vital has ongoing utility and affordability in low resource settings like disaster scenarios, developing countries, and war zones.
So that's a fantastic question, and our licensees actually are all over that. In fact, what we've found is, we were trying to specifically help during the pandemic, and what we found was that there were only certain features that were really needed for COVID patients. But it turns out those are kind of the basic features of a ventilator. And so you can consider it kind of a stripped down, simple model of a ventilator, but very functional and very useful for a wide range of patient needs. And so our licensees are absolutely looking for, where are there not enough ventilators, even when it's not a pandemic? And is this something that can help solve shortages that aren't pandemic related as well. So yes, I'd point you to our licensees who are out there in the world doing fantastic things in many countries around the world.
Awesome. And I think this next question from Rachel on Facebook, where did the name Vital come from, is sort of related to that as well. If you want to talk about the expansion of that acronym.
Yes, we like to come up with acronyms for almost everything. It's part of what we do for space, and we spent a bit of time, but it's not like we had a lot of spare time to come up with, the we always want to have done more. And was there something else we can do? We weren't sure whether we were building a ventilator or if we were building technology. The point was we were trying to help, and we wanted above all to make something accessible locally. And so we kind of settled on the name Vital. I think it was Dave Van Buren who came up with Vital, that wound up sticking. Do you remember, Kat?
I can't remember. I thought it was Rob Manning, but maybe not.
We had a lot of brainstorming sessions. So, this was a really intense engineering effort. And what I will say is we had a lot of very deep technical conversations, but then we would also do other things for team building and for also to try to stay sane. I mean, this was kind of an around the clock effort. And we had meetings where we were talking about, what we could call it. We also spent some time looking at the design to try to find ways to kind of humanize the design to make it just look a little nicer. This thing, as you can see, it looks like it belongs in a hospital because it was designed to look like it belonged in a hospital. But working with Kat and her team, we were able to we had, for example, some stickers that we designed to put on it to add kind of a human touch on the ventilator. So we're probably the only ventilator that came with an accessory kit.
That's absolutely true. I forgot we have to shout out Design Lab and the studio at JPL for those amazing little human touches. Brian White on YouTube asks, was there ever a moment of we'll never figure this out, or was there always a level of we must get this done?
Yes to both. I mean, we had those in parallel, I think. But there were plenty of times where we felt like we were stuck, but we couldn't allow ourselves to be stuck. And so this was one of those where we had to just be there for each other. And that's part of why we had such frequent tag ups. Nothing was allowed to really simmer for very long. If you ran into any kind of roadblock, you could reach out to anybody else on the team using I can't even count how many different tools we had going because we used literally everything that was out there at the time. And in the mornings and in the evenings, we would tag up, and we wouldn't stop working after the evening tag up because by the morning tag up, if you had an issue, somebody else would have picked up and helped work on it. And so we were checking in with each other. We were trying to make sure that the atmosphere stayed positive. We started, and this was Carrie Weisberg would start every meeting reading kind of our purpose statement of what are we trying to do, and to just ad lib it. It's along the lines of creating a ventilator that serves the majority of patient needs as quickly and efficiently as we can to help with the current pandemic. And it was said a little more eloquently than I could just do a few years later off the top of my head, but it got us all grounded to say, this is what we're doing. Let's come back. This is what matters. Whatever else, is secondary. This is what we're trying to do. And it helped us stay focused.
Amazing. So this question, I love your answer to this, Stacey, so I gotta ask it. Rachel on Facebook asks, what advice do you have for anyone who might want to follow in your footsteps and go into the STEM field?
Oh, goodness. Really what I would tell you is just learn, pick up experiences, do the things that interest you. You're not going to know how useful or not something you learn is until way too late. Just learn it, pick it up, absorb it as you go, and don't stress so much about exactly where you're headed or how or why. Because if you're learning and if you're really passionate about what you're doing, you're going to be picking these things up. You're adding tools to your toolbox, and you don't know what the problem's going to be later. But those experiences that you gather are the things that are going to help you solve or address whatever the problem is. And, sometimes it's physics, sometimes it's engineering. But, Kat, there were more than one meeting where the answer was a movie quote. that actually got us unstuck from something, or, kind of lighten the mood, a joke, a movie quote, the things that you read in high school. I mean, you name it. All of your experiences are things that actually help make you who you are and what you know, and what help guide what you're able to do later. And so if I could tell myself something from, me back in high school, would be to just stress a lot less that every single decision is not make or break. You can still get wherever you want to go, just might be taking a different path. But really, just learning and following your passions is where you're going to have the most success. If you love what you're doing, you're going to put your heart in it, and that's where you'll do your best.
Amazing. And I'm going to sort of combo two questions together. Here, Rundell on Facebook is asking, are you still working on ventilators at this moment, or are you working on a different project? And I kind of want to combine that with Bruce on YouTube's question of, for the people who worked on Vital, what were their regular jobs before getting involved in the project? Stacey, could you talk a little bit about what you're doing now and what your sort of day job
Sure.
was before you got pulled into it?
Yeah, I can do that. What I was doing at the time is actually what I'm back to doing again now, which is I'm the project system engineer, which is kind of the technical lead for a mission called Maya, the multi-angle imager for aerosols. And we are going to launch in 2025. And we're an instrument, an Earth Venture instrument that measures particles in the atmosphere over certain targets around the world. And by measuring those particles and understanding what the quantity and the types of particles are over those target areas, we combine that with measurements we take on the ground and things we do with models to understand how particle type and exposure impacts human health. Because we know that environmental pollution, air pollution, is the number one environmental cause of human health issues and death. And it's associated with things, of course, like asthma, but also things cardiovascular events, heart attack, stroke, preterm deliveries, low birth weights. But what we don't know is what kinds of particles cause what kinds of health problems. And so what Maya is going to do is take the data that we need to then work with epidemiologists who study human health to actually combine information about exposure to information about health outcomes and try to actually answer that question so that we can do something about it and hopefully improve life and health for people on Earth. And so day to day, I'm an engineer and I work on space missions. Usually Earth observing missions are most of what I've been doing since I joined JPL. Other members of the team from Vital, we have people who worked on Mars rovers. We have people who are working on Europa. We have you name a planet, a moon, a element of the Earth system. We probably had somebody working on it. And so we have people who work with mechanisms, people who work with writing. I mean, our documentation team helped us pull together from so many different contributors these packages with adding. I mean, we finished our testing on day 38, and by day 40, we submitted this package to the FDA for an emergency use authorization. I mean, the amount of things that happened in parallel, it required so many different types of skills, and our team just had all of them. And, you mentioned the studio, Kat, you help a lot of different missions with their designs and with helping convey and storytell what we're actually trying to do, because we propose new missions, we write proposals. Some people work in formulation, some work in flight. And really, the whole team is back to doing their day jobs. But every now and then, we'll hear from a licensee or someone asking us a question that kind of reminds us about this other life that we lived early in the pandemic. And I have to say, it's really, it usually catches us a bit off guard. It's a little bit of a, wait, what? Why are you asking me? And then it's like, oh, because I did this. And it's just such a privilege to be able to still support when we can, when there are questions, and to know that this is really out there doing the thing that we hoped it would be able to do when it was just the beginning of an idea.
Stacey, once again, you have amazed us with all the information you've provided, but also with understanding how involved and integral this team process is. And so before we get your final thoughts, I do want to take a moment to ask Kat, who was also a part of this team. Kat, you've gotten a little emotional. You've gotten excited throughout this talk. Tell me, what was it like being a part of this team for you?
Very, very exciting in a way. It felt like very important work, and it was I mean, honestly, a little bit like Stacey's experience where, when someone called to ask if I could participate, it was just kind of course, and then, like, heads down and starting to work. I think, I worked really closely with Stacey, and I think during those 38 days, I talked to Stacey almost every day, putting that instruction manual together. But yeah, it was just incredible. I think I spoke previously about the generosity of the team. Everybody who was involved with it was completely on board. Their phones were available. You could call them. They would get on meetings with you. They would hop on a video call with you. Anything you needed. They were so generous with their knowledge and their experience and their time, especially during a time where everyone was, like Stacey said, thinking about their families, their health, and everything. So it was an incredible experience to look back on. And also looking back on it now, like Stacey said, pretty surreal. I think I ran into you, Stacey, in real life for the first time this past year, and I didn't recognize you after seeing you on video for the entire time. But yeah.
Well, Kat, I want to say thank you for bringing in the audience Q&A, and folks that were watching, thank you so much for your wonderful questions tonight. Stacey, you've got some final words for us before we sign off for the evening.
I think Kat said it just great. I would just add that generosity and the help that we received from the doctors, from the FDA, from medical device manufacturers really was eye-opening just how many people were out there trying to help. In a difficult time when we were trying to do something, if you could get over the discomfort of having to ask and, to just put yourself out there and ask, people were willing to help. I don't know that anybody really hung up the phone or said no. And it really was something to see, a gift at a difficult time to see how many people were willing to help. You couldn't help but feel hopeful. Hopeful that we were going to get through this, hopeful that what we were going to do could make a difference, and that knowing that we were just one effort during the pandemic. Other companies, other people, even other teams at JPL were doing things to try to help. And knowing that spirit was out there and knowing how many people were willing to really jump in and just do anything they could to help out, it was a very different view of the world that I don't think I would have gotten to see. And it's something that I'll always take with me.
So, folks, on that wonderful note of generosity and thankfulness for this amazing project, I do unfortunately have to tell you that this is all the time we have for tonight. I want to thank our fantastic speaker, Dr. Stacey Boland, and our wonderful questions co-host, Kat Park, for joining us to discuss this truly vital work. And I apologize, I had to put the pun in somewhere. So thank you for the truly vital work that you did for us. Also, thank you to everyone working behind the scenes to make this possible, and to all of you watching. Thank you for taking the time to join us every month. If you missed one or would like to revisit any of our Von Karman talks from the past 5 years, they are also available on JPL's YouTube page. And do join us next month for a discussion on Sunrise, the CubeSat array that will study the sun. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you in August. Bye.